nursing part? Like, what is a process overall? Right, you said it, starting,
Yeah.
and the end result is either a finished project
Right.
or a finished paper or something like that, right? But there's a process to go through in order to reach your destination or the end of that, okay? So the same is true in nursing with many of the things we do, okay? There's 5 parts, 5 steps in the nursing process, okay? And we've done a few of these already without you even realizing that we're doing them, okay? It's assessing, diagnosing, planning, implementing, and evaluating.
Oh, wait, we didn't get it.
Okay, everybody with me?
Can you finish please so we can go this way? Okay, fine.
So they give some acronyms here. I don't know if it was helpful. I think an apple pie was more helpful than a delicious pie. But it's just to give you the acronym for the 5
Yeah, and
steps.
she can please.
Okay? Can you see this? So the 5 steps, we're going to go over each step and discuss it, okay? So the first step is assessing. So what do we do as we're assessing the patient? Yeah, raise your hand. The physical assessment, right? That's where we're assessing the patient, a physical assessment. It does include vital signs. It does include the head-to-toe assessment, which includes all of those other parts, right? So that's a very important part, because if you don't look at the patient and examine the patient, how are we going to know what's going on with them, okay? Secondly is diagnosing. So do nurses diagnose?
No.
Yes.
No.
No.
Let me rephrase it. Do nurses make medical diagnoses?
No.
No. But we do nursing diagnosis, correct?
Yes.
And that we will discuss as we go on. And that's part of our care plan and part of our documentation and prioritizing what's the issues with the patients, okay? So we're not making a diagnosis of the patient had a heart attack, right? But nursing, we're looking at what do we need to do to get this patient from A to B in their health journey, okay? Make sense? Everybody's tired this morning. Planning. So you're going to prioritize the problems, right? If a patient comes in with pneumonia, right, and they happen to have, upon examination, we find out that the patient has, trying to put something, the patient has an ingrown toenail, right? So what would be the priority though?
Pneumonia.
The pneumonia, right? The breathing, the fever, you know, anything goes along with that. And the ingrown toenail is, even though it's a problem, it's a secondary problem. Okay, that's a really wide description of that, but that's kind of what that means, okay? Implementing, okay? So once we make a plan, we need to decide how we're going to implement that. And again, implementing is priorities, right? We're going to go back to the same patient with pneumonia. The doctor orders IV antibiotics, IV fluids, Tylenol for fever, and oxygen, right? So that's the plan. We diagnosed, we had the assessment, we did it. What's the priority of those 4 with the patient with pneumonia? Oxygen, right? Because it doesn't matter if we give them antibiotics if you can't breathe, right? So that's where you would, when you look at things, that's how you're going to prioritize your care and the plan, okay? And then evaluate. Did what we do work? Did the antibiotics help relieve the pneumonia? Did the oxygen provide comfort to the patient so that they're not short of breath anymore, okay? Did everybody sign the sign-in sheet? There's always one. Excuse me. And your care plan will have these 5 steps also, okay? So we assess, we make a nursing diagnosis, we plan it out, we implement it, and then at the very end, did what we did all of those 4 steps before work? And if not, what do we need to do to reassess and go back again, okay? So it's a really good framework for you as new nurses to do it in this pattern, right? Because it gives you a clear delineation of what we need to do, and then at the end, all right, did this work or not? When you're in 21 and you're in your labs, what we used to do is we would have scenarios of the patient. So say the patient with pneumonia, we'll stick with pneumonia. And the patient came in and the patient, you know, what we did for the patient. We called the doctor said give the patient this, and it would be on the board, and then we would label everything. And then the last thing would be, we're evaluating all of our actions to see if they were appropriate and did they work. Okay? So the next gen NIPLEX, that's how your questions are going to be formatted. They're going to give you a scenario, they're going to give you the steps, and then you make a determination whether or not the steps worked, did they not work, what might you have to do differently, okay? Make sense? Okay? So really, if you think along these lines, it'll make it much easier for you, okay? So what's the goal of the nursing process? So we talked about the nursing process itself, the 5 steps, and how we're going to do that. So what would be the goal, right? If you just think of it step by step, we're identifying a patient's healthcare status and actual or potential health problems. If a patient comes in with pneumonia, do you think that's the only problem they have?
No.
Right? Most Americans have what we call comorbid medical modalities, meaning that they have other diseases that are chronic, diabetes, high blood pressure, you know, a glaucoma, you know, something like that. So while our focus would be on the admitting diagnosis, we don't ignore everything else, right? We have to see how that plays into the admitting diagnosis and correlate the two, right? If you have a patient who has pneumonia and the doctor puts them on steroids, which is a medication that acts as like an anti-inflammatory and relaxes the lungs a little bit, but what can that do to your blood sugar is elevated artificially. So what we're doing to help could work on something else. So we need to be able to be aware of all that. Did those lights just come on? Do you want them off? Is it better? Can you turn it? Okay, to establish plans to meet the identified needs, right? In our assessment, it's the same thing. We saw what the patient needed, and now we're making plans to do that. And then to deliver specific nursing interventions to address those needs. What's nursing interventions? Excuse me. What would be a nursing intervention?
I teach the patient what's in the therapy.
To teach a patient, right? But more specifically.
Cleaning wound?
Right, well, it's a pneumonia patient. We're going to stick with pneumonia.
The medication was given to him.
Administer the medication and make sure the oxygen is correct, right? Make sure that it's in proper placement, that the mask isn't down here giving oxygen to the chin, you know.
Monitoring?
Monitoring, yes.
Breathing exercise.
Breathing exercises, right? Because if someone with pneumonia, you need to get them to open up their lungs a little bit. So then data from each phase provides input into the next phase. And we kind of just spoke about that, right? When you're assessing, you're setting yourself up to see what the diagnosis, what your nursing diagnosis is, right? So each goes into each other, and that's why it's a process. Because each side, each part of it assists you in filling the next part. All right, does that make sense? Yes, okay. The process is patient-centered. So in my lecture yesterday, we talked a lot about cultures and ethics and morals, right? So the process is patient-centered. So we said yesterday, as nurses, we are patient advocates, right? So everything that we do is to the benefit of the patient, correct?
Yes.
Right? So this is why it's patient-centered. You need to look at what your plan is, and am I taking care of the patient by doing this? All right? It seems that, well, of course we are. You know, the doctor's not gonna write an order that's not gonna be good for the patient,